Hey guys, it's me again, and it is time to get a little bit more in-depth about plants and the different groupings of plants. Now, I think there are like 20 slides left to this one PowerPoint. I'm not sure how far I'm going to get before I break it off. I'll just keep an eye on the time to keep this into manageable chunks because I know that these are divided up in your labs as well as in your weekly learning modules. And so I don't know if I'll go through all of them at once or if I'm just going to go ahead and cut this up into little manageable bits and pieces. So there are 4 different groupings of plants. And so they are the non-vascular plants, what we call the bryophytes, the seedless vascular plants, the gymnosperms, and the angiosperms. And as you can see, like some of these names imply their different characteristics. But this also reflects kind of as evolution marched on, the different features that plants, the characteristics of plants going from an aquatic existence to a terrestrial existence. We are going to go ahead and start off in the beginning here, and that is the non-vascular plants. So as far as non-vascular plants, we refer to these as bryophytes. These plants are terrestrial, okay? So they're definitely terrestrial, so we've got that. But they lack a lot of things that some of the more, I should say, everyday common plants that we see as we walk out our door have. So first of all, they don't have a vascular system, which is why they're called non-vascular plants. I guess you could have come to your own conclusion on that, but nonetheless. So there's no xylem or no phloem. What this means is that they don't have a means of carrying nutrients, sugars, water to and from each of the parts of the plants, and therefore they have to, they're not that big. They don't have a vascular system. They have to transport all of these things some other way. And so they can't be very tall. And they also have to be near a water source where it's moist or where like they're splashed with water or it's misty. And because they absorb these things like directly through their cells and through their tissues, since they don't have a vascular system. And they have no true roots. Again, they don't have roots to suck water up. They have rhizoids, which kind of keep them anchored to someplace. And so therefore, again, they need to be someplace moist, like on stream banks or in a very wet area, in order to maintain their nutrient acquisition and water acquisition. They don't have leaves. They don't have stems. They don't have seeds. They don't have flowers, and they don't have fruits. So all these things that maybe some of us associate with plants, they don't have, but they are multicellular, and they are autotrophic. And so here we go with this particular grouping. So not only is water necessary for them to be able to acquire their nutrients, since they don't have roots, they don't have stems, they don't have vascular systems. But it's also necessary for reproduction. They don't have seeds, right? So they have to somehow have their embryos or spores or what have you travel from one place to another, the eggs and the sperm, and they require water in order to do that. So these are found, again, stream banks, wet places, and some of these you may actually recognize. So you have 3 phyla here. You have Hepatophytas, the Anthracotrophytas, and the Bryophytas. And I think we're going to see all of these in lab. Your liverworts, your hornworts, and your mosses. That's the most familiar one, is moss, I think, to people. In fact, moss is even referred to as just a bryophyte in general. But they share similar characteristics, in which puts them into the grouping of non-vascular plants. Now, here is the alternation of generations with non-vascular plants. And one thing that is different than alternation of generations from the other groupings of plants is that you have the gametophyte that is dominant. The sporophyte is not dominant in the alternation of generations. But it basically, it works the same, and you see this, and you're looking at it like, wow, this is really complicated. You have all sorts of terms here that you may not recognize. But if we start here on the left-hand side, you see the mature sporophyte. Remember, sporophytes are diploid, 2N. The sporangium, which contains the spores. Remember, the spores are formed through meiosis, so those spores are haploid. And we're now at the top here. You see the spores, which form into the protonema, meiosis, which is like the embryo kind of. Mitosis occurs, so that protonema continues to develop. And then you have the mature gametophytes on the right-hand side. You have the mature gametophytes, which are haploid, developed into those particular structures. You have got the male and the female structures. Of course, these are gametophytes, so they are producing eggs and sperm. And you see that fertilization takes place. There you see the antheridium producing the sperm. You see the archegonium producing the, which has the egg in it. Oh, wait, I made a mistake, and I don't want to record this again. Let's go back. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake in terminology. You see back to the left-hand side, you have the sporophyte, which produces spores through meiosis. Those spores, the protonema, I refer to those as like embryos. They're not embryos, okay. They develop into the gametophytes. I apologize for that. Anyway, so we're here back on the right-hand side where you have the mature gametophytes. You see that the antheridium, it's producing gametes, eggs and sperm. The antheridium is producing the sperm, gets fertilized in the egg that's located in the archegonium. You have fertilization take place. Now these are diploid. The embryo is produced and then inside the archegonium, and then that matures into the sporophyte. All right. Okay, so that is an overview of the alternation of generations. I recommend you watch the YouTube video on that. And then you have the time marches on from an evolutionary standpoint. So the non-vascular plants they pretty much don't have anything that we think of as a plant. But then some time continues marching forward, and we have some evolutionary things go on. And now what you have in this next grouping of plants, what we call the seedless vascular plants, you now have a vascular system. You have roots and you have leaves. So that's cool. You still do not have seeds, flowers, or fruits. So that's why we refer to these as seedless vascular plants. Now, the bit with the seedless vascular plants, one kind of an aside, is you still are confined to areas that have water. Like with the non-vascular plants, like they were terrestrial, but they were confined to water very closely because you needed water to reproduce and you needed water to grow and for nutrient acquisition. It's the same with the seedless vascular plants. So these are found in moist environments in that they have flagellated sperms. So you have to have water actually carry spores and carry sperm. So you're still kind of tied in with water in some way, shape, or form, but you aren't necessarily, like you don't have to be like right next to a stream, for instance. We have two phyla. We have the lycophytes and the monolithites. Sorry about that, because that's a new phylum to me. So you have club mosses, spike mosses, and quillworts. You also have in the monophyleophytes, ferns, horsetails, and whisk ferns. And many of these you are going to see in lab. The ferns are probably the most familiar example. most people are familiar with what a fern is. Your alternation of generations went through this in the lecture before, so I'm not going to go through this again as far as, because the example that's often given is of a fern. And so I'll just go through this briefly. As you recall, you have the diploid mature sporophyte, which produces spores through meiosis. Those spores develop into the young gametophytes, which are haploid. The mature gametophyte produces eggs and sperm. The antheridium produces sperm. The archegonium produces eggs. The sperm fertilizes the eggs. That zygote then develops into the sporophyte. As far as the next grouping of plants, now we continue marching onwards. Okay, so now what we have in what we refer to as gymnosperms, the grouping of plants we call gymnosperms. Again, you have a vascular system, you have true leaves, stems, and roots. Now you have seeds. Seedless vascular plants didn't have seeds. Now we have seeds. But what we don't have yet are flowers and fruits. But the seeds we say are naked seeds because we don't have fruits yet that are enclosed by ripened ovaries, what we call a fruit. Generally what we have here are cones. Now that's the reproductive structures, but the big deal here is that we've made this leap as far as gymnosperms. Of course, seeds are a big deal, but we also have that we're no longer dependent on a water source or mist or rain for fertilization to occur. You have the ability for these to be carried. The pollen, the male, or the sperm, which is enclosed in the pollen, the male gametophyte, is carried by the air. Big deal. This is a huge deal because now terrestrial plants can develop away from water. Now, of course, you need rain or some sort of hydration, but you don't need to be near a body of water or to continue to be like wet or moist all of the time. As far as gymnosperms, we have the psychophytes, the ginkgophytes, the nenatophytes, and the coniferophytes. So the most common, or I should say the most familiar to many people, are the coniferophytes. They produce the cones. The cycads they produce large cones and they have palm-like leaves. We do have one in lab you're going to see. Ginkgophyta, you'll see an example of this in lab, but we have one on campus. These are broad-leafed. Most gymnosperms are actually needle-like leaves and have kind of a modified reproductive structure. It's not considered a fruit. You have the gametophytes. These are almost like grass-like looking, and the coniferophytes, the conifers, which are the needle-like leaves that have prominent cones. Now, the alternation of generations here is extremely interesting, and it's the same way with our next grouping too, and that is that the male gametophyte are contained within the pollen grains, what we call the microsporangia. The microsporangia produces microspores, which gives rise to male gametophytes. So when you see pollen, that is actually that contains the male gametophytes. The female gametophytes, please don't. I don't want to record this over again. The female gametophytes are produced in the ovules. So the megasporangia produce megaspores, which give rise to female gametophytes. This is what we refer to as heterospory, separate male and female gametophytes, versus homospory, where the male and females are on the same. So this is a really important aspect of alternation of generations, that you have reduced gametophytes and the sporophyte is dominant. So like the gametophyte generation are basically like the male gametophytes are just in pollen grains, which are microscopic, and then the female gametophytes are in the ovules, which is also microscopic. And so what you would see, like a tree, the pine tree, is the sporophyte, and then the pollen and the ovules it contains are the gametophytes. And you see that here, as far as your mature sporophyte, I'm looking on the left-hand side, which looks like some sort of a pine tree. You have your ovulate cone, which is the female, and the pollen cone, which is the male, contains the pollen. And through meiosis, you have the male gametophyte produce pollen grain. And then as far as in the female cone and the ovule, you have meiosis that produces the female gametophyte. I'm kind of going downwards here now on the right hand side. You have fertilization occur, and then you have the embryo actually form inside the seed. Now remember, we have true seeds, and now with fertilization you go from that haploid condition to the diploid condition, which then develops into the mature sporophyte, and there is a video there for you. Now there is the last grouping, the angiosperms. We're going to cover that in the next lecture because it's just going to get a bit too long here, because with the angiosperms we're going to include flowers and fruits and seeds. All right, see you. Bye for now.